and we'll just start with the first recap presentation. Can everyone see my screen? It should say Intro to Avalanches. Sweet, looks good. Okay, so, oh, maybe we do have something in the chat. Oh, he just responded yes. Thank you, Levi. So Intro to Avalanches and Terrain. This was the presentation for the first presentation for the Avalanche Fundamentals series, and what it covered is just kind of basic terminology, introduction to avalanches and why they're dangerous and why we care, and then talking about avalanche terrain ID, and then kind of the simple practical steps to reducing your exposure to avalanche hazard. So the bottom line is avalanches are the #1 cause of death on forest land in the winter. And if you're recreating in the winter and you're riding in the mountains or even riding on trails in the mountains, you need to know about avalanches. So admit this person who just jumped on. So yeah, if you're recreating in the winter, you need to know about avalanches so that you can keep yourself safer. Even if the only reason you want to learn about avalanches is to avoid going anywhere near where avalanches can happen, you still need to know a thing or two about avalanches to do that. So we kind of started off with a general definition. Avalanches, snow moving down slope. We have two main kinds. I have two pictures right after this to show the two different types. And we want to know why avalanches form and what they are, because we can learn about their patterns and like the patterns of terrain and weather and snowpack that cause avalanches so that we can avoid being caught in avalanches. So this is an example of a loose avalanche, and that's basically our snow isn't cohesive with itself. So the snow is either dry or wet and doesn't stick to the snow that's underneath it. It's generally speaking the surface level snow. So when you see loose avalanches, you could hear them called like sloughs or point releases. They're typically just a couple inches of snow on the surface. These can still be dangerous if, for example, we're knocked off a machine due to them, or we're riding around cliffs. Just any place that getting knocked over could injure us. So we still want to be aware of loose avalanches, but our primary killer is slab avalanches. This is a picture of a pretty big slab avalanche. I think Eric Knopf took this one, former forecaster for the GNFAC. And some of the characteristics of slab avalanches that are really dangerous is how wide they can break across slopes and how quickly they can pick up momentum. So the classic like pane of glass shattering, the snowpack is failing across a large space, and it can be really, you can trigger avalanches that are still quite deep. So you can have like a lot of mass moving down the mountain really quickly with a slab avalanche. And that's why they're so dangerous. So in particular, dry slab avalanches are the most dangerous. And that's what we're going to spend our time talking about. So both this discussion about kind of the background for avalanches and avalanche terrain, like we're going to talk about primarily slab avalanches. And it's not because we shouldn't also be concerned about loose avalanches. It's just because statistically slab avalanches are more dangerous. Like they're what is catching and killing people. So to have a slab avalanche, we need a couple things. We need to have a layered snowpack, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We need to have a steep enough slope to slide. And then we need to have some type of trigger, whether that's like in this picture, it's like somebody split boarding on a slope, or increase loading on the slope. So from a snowstorm or from a wind event, or like 2 weeks ago at Big Sky, they had a mountain goat trigger an avalanche. So you need some type of load, because otherwise you wouldn't necessarily see, like we all travel around in the mountains and we don't see avalanches happening like left and right, like on any steep slope that has a layered snowpack. Like we need to have unstable conditions to have avalanches. So what I'm primarily going to talk about right now is the terrain component. Terrain is the thing, is I guess the component about avalanches that we can really control. So we can ask ourselves, can this slope produce an avalanche? And like actually get a definitive answer. What are the consequences of an avalanche here? And then like, what are we going to do about it? So in the field, like we're going to emphasize identifying avalanche terrain and also being able to travel through the mountains where there's avalanche terrain and like avoid being exposed to the avalanche terrain where we can. My dog is barking if anyone can hear that in the back. So where are avalanches happening? This picture is actually up outside of Bridger Bowl on Saddle Peak. And avalanches are generally starting on slopes steeper than 30 degrees. Most avalanches happen in the 30 to 45 degree range, with most of them happening in the upper 30 degrees, so 38 to 40 degrees is like statistically where most avalanches are happening. We also want to be concerned, like not only with like, oh, can an avalanche happen on this slope, but like what happens if there's an avalanche here? So like under this particular slope, there's a cliff band. So if you're knocked off your feet or knocked off a machine, you're going to get rung over a cliff. And that's a pretty bad consequence. Or say you're over a lake. Like there was a really sad accident, I think last winter in Colorado, where several riders were knocked over and caught in an avalanche and then pushed them onto a lake. So just thinking about like, okay, is this avalanche terrain? And if it avalanches, what's it going to look like? What's going to happen here? And we need to be able to ask these questions to then get to the third question, which is like, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? I always like to bring it back to keeping it really simple. There's a lot of things that we have to learn to be good backcountry travelers. That we basically end up having these like mental maps in our heads about like, oh, where are spots where avalanches can happen? Where are locations where we have a loaded snowpack? But ultimately, like we can use really cool tools like this screenshot of a map I took this afternoon. We can use these really cool digital tools to help us make some decisions or make things a little bit easier. So kind of the main takeaways from this are like, know where you are, know where avalanches can start, run, and stop, because that's avalanche terrain. All of those things, like locations where avalanches initiate, where the tracks would run, and where the debris would pile up. Because we want to be able to know how to recognize these places so we can avoid them if there's unstable conditions. And so we can stay away from places that can hurt us if we don't want to be there. I kind of put the disclaimer on here that like we have these super awesome tools to help us navigate the backcountry now. But these aren't substitutes for common sense. So you can use these slope angle shading. So on my screen, you can see the slope angle shading. And this is actually up Buck Ridge, where we'll be out in the field, but you can like see the slope angle shading. And these are not intended to be used like absolutely. Like they may not be accurate for like the character of a whole slope. And you need to use your context clues too of like, oh, am I seeing like trees that look different here? Is there a history of this slope avalanching? Like you got to put it all together. You can't just like solely rely on an app to save you. Because I think we all know like computer apps have their limitations, phone apps have their limitations. And you need to be able to recognize avalanche terrain even if your phone dies. So these are really cool tools, but we always want to use our common sense. And then I think we always really want to follow good travel practices too. So like these are things that pros do, like, and you do them consistently. So we want to try to limit multiple people being in avalanche terrain at once. We want to try to stop and watch our partners from less exposed areas, like have a spotter. We want to communicate well when we're entering avalanche terrain and have a plan. And these are like things we do every day out that help us manage avalanche terrain. And I think like going back to those last two pictures, I think like you can only do these things if you know what avalanche terrain looks like, and if your group is on the same page about what avalanche terrain is. And like terrain is the one kind of constant, and it's also that back to that one thing that you can really control. So like we get to choose where we're putting ourselves on any given slope mostly. And we can choose to, dial it back and stay out from underneath side paths if we're concerned about being avalanched on. Like I think a really good example of that is there are a lot of places where groomed trails run through avalanche terrain. And if you're not paying attention, you may not necessarily realize that. And you have to just like use the digital tools to help you know that ahead of time. And then also like stop and look around you. Like don't just like zip across a groomer. Like there's a lot of places in Cook City, for example, where people have been caught and killed by avalanches like on a groomed trail. So like really being aware of your exposure and being aware of it ahead of time is going to go a really long way in traveling safely. But yeah, these things are like hard to do all the time, and like we recognize that, but it's like these are really the things that keep people safer. So that's the section, the recap section on kind of terrain. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to stop my share and get ready for the next one. Man, no questions. I'm stumping you all.
That, or they're all train experts. Yep, you nailed it.
Pull up this next one here. Oh gosh, what's happening? There we go. I was like, couldn't find my slideshow bar. Okay, one sec. Let me go back. So, my disclaimer is the last slide deck. I made that one off of the video that I talked through. This next one is one of my coworkers' slide decks. So hopefully I nail it for Dave Zinn. He's the one who did the video for this section. And so when we think about this big picture, this is our avalanche triangle here of like all the things that need all the components that need to be present to have avalanches. Like we need to have terrain that's capable of avalanching. We need to have a snowpack that's layered and is unstable. And then weather typically contributes either to that snowpack or to the loading, where we have enough of a load to tip us into unstable or tip us into natural avalanches. And then where we come in, Zach's going to talk a lot more about this. Where we come in is like the way we make decisions and the way we interact with the mountains and avalanche terrain. And like there wouldn't be an avalanche problem without people. So it's just always worth remembering that. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about this recipe we need for a slab avalanche. So to have slab avalanches, we need to have some kind of cohesive snow, or snow that wants to stick to itself, and then snow that's under it that's a weak layer, or snow that doesn't want to stick as well to the slab. And that can look different depending on the type of specific avalanche problem or the type of weather conditions we have. So we have weather events that cause different layers in the snowpack. We got one person in our waiting room. We have different weather events that cause layers within the snowpack throughout the year. And right now our snowpack is like surprisingly not that layered. Like in Southwest Montana, we have had very little snow this year. And like you might find a couple like little ice layers buried in there, but like our snowpack is just rotten, like weak, sugary snow right now. So our snowpack for this weekend it's actually like if you were to take this video and just only have the second half. That's kind of what our snowpack looks like right now. Maybe not quite that weak. But I'll play this video a couple times because I think it's really cool to see this whole concept of something over nothing. And this is like the most extreme example. This is like wind-packed snow that's really cohesive with that rotten weak snow below it. So this is like absolutely our recipe for an avalanche. And it gets a lot more complicated than this because if the snowpack was just like this all the time, it would be actually pretty easy to decide not to go in steep terrain because you'd probably see avalanches happen a lot if your snowpack looked like this all the time. So as far as avalanche problem types, we can kind of split it into two categories. We like categorizing things. We have these new snow problems versus persistent or old snow or like kind of lingering. You know what persistent means? It's like problems that stick around over time. And we group these into two separate kind of buckets, if you will, because they behave differently. And some things about these new snow avalanches, we call them like the direct action. Like when it snows, we expect to see an increase in avalanches because we have put weight on the snowpack. When it is windy, we expect to build wind slabs, so cohesive pieces of snow over snow that's less cohesive. And so these types of instabilities generally form quickly and then also resolve more quickly. So I'm originally from Northern California, and when I worked in the Sierra, we would often get 5 or 6 feet of snow at once. Like that's not very uncommon out there. And we would generally just have to let the snow settle, and we would see better stability by waiting. So if you wait, 24 to 48 hours, these new snow instabilities generally work themselves out. So that's where this parentheses direct action hour day comes in. Like these instabilities work themselves out pretty quickly versus these persistent weak layers that we often see in continental and intermountain locations. So these are buried weak layers that live within our snowpack for a long time. And like a year like this year, where we ended up having these persistent weak layers develop early and they're continuing to develop right now, like we're going to expect them to be in play for the rest of the season. And the kind of major differences between these two kind of buckets of avalanche problem, the new snow versus persistent, is also how they can behave. Like when we have widespread, so like all across the landscape, persistent weak layers, we would anticipate, and we finally load these, we would anticipate seeing very large avalanches in a lot of locations or having instability in a lot of locations. So I think it's just worth recognizing that, and that the instability may not be as obvious always as like say with the new snow, like storm snow or wind, where you can see the wind affected snow, you can see the cornices forming. And I think these persistent weak layers can be a little trickier. I think we're going to talk, actually this goes first to talking about these direct action, but I think what's more important is perhaps the persistent weak layer conversation of like how these form, what they are. So what this is showing though is just within storm snow, like if we get a storm that comes in, warm and leaves cold, that's what we would call a right side up snowpack versus the opposite where we have a storm that comes in cold and leaves warm, that would be our upside down. But within a storm, we can have small different layer changes that could be from temperature, it could be from the wind. And so we can have layers that are unstable within a storm event. So kind of digging into these persistent weak layers a little bit more, depth hoar is going to just be the most extreme kind of form that we'll see for weak layers. It's going to be near the ground. You can probably find some. I bet you guys will. I don't know, Zach, did you find any when you were digging around at Buck in the last couple days? Any really large crystals?
Yeah, there's definitely some pretty large developed basal facets there.
Yeah, so we call them facets, we call them depth hoar. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. Depth hoar is just really big facets. And so you'd expect to find this at the bottom of the snowpack. You'd see facets in many different locations. And like what we're talking about with these crystals is like, look at this picture. The snow didn't fall from the sky looking like that. It fell from the sky looking like one of those pretty snowflakes or like column or, grapple. Like snow comes from the sky looking many different ways, but the snow grew to look like this picture. And it's a kind of complex like vapor transport phenomena that's going on. But what we really need to know is how to identify this and know that it's a problem if we're seeing red flags or if we're getting unstable test results or the forecast is talking about unstable slopes. Like we need to recognize when these are in play and be able to act accordingly. The kind of final of these persistent weak layers is something that we've probably all seen, the beautiful glittery snow on the surface, or surface hoar. This is also basically a vapor transport phenomena. It's kind of like dew, but the frozen version of it. So it's really beautiful. This is a problem if it gets buried. We have a lot of locations where surface hoar is about to get buried by the incoming storm. So I would say we have all of these different persistent weak layers in our snowpack right now. These are all only a problem when they're buried by a slab. So if anyone's been following our forecast recently, you may have noticed that we have a low avalanche hazard, and that's partially because we have all these things, but in many spots we don't have a slab on top of them. So this kind of relates to both the kind of new snow, the new snow avalanche problems and the persistent problems. When we load a snowpack quickly, we're going to get instability. So whether that's putting a bunch of new snow or a bunch of water. So if the snow comes in really, really heavy, it's going to have more water in it. If we load a snowpack quickly, we're going to see instability. And the same goes for wind. Wind can transport snow 10 times faster than it can fall from the sky. And like you've all probably seen wind loaded slopes that are super deep compared to the rest of the snowpack. Like with wind, we can get really rapidly loaded slopes. So just know that like more, like the faster the change, the more instability you're going to get with these different types of, buried weak layers, regardless of whether it's new snow or persistent problems. So getting to the meat of it, like we can default to using really simple observations to tell if there's unstable snow. The most simple is if we're seeing avalanches. So recent avalanches is like our number one piece of information. Like if you see an avalanche, you can be pretty certain that slopes with similar aspect, elevation, and similar snowpack structure are also going to be unstable. Like it's doesn't take a rocket scientist to make that determination. And the same goes with this whole like woofing, shooting cracks. Like that is basically an avalanche without a steep enough slope to slide. So if any of you have ever gotten like a large slope to collapse, you'd probably feel it or hear it, but you'd have to have your machine turned off to do that. Or like if you ended up boot packing away from your sled, you may encounter a wolf. But this is basically an avalanche without a steep enough slope. The other red flags would be just big loads. So like a lot of snow, anytime rain's involved, like big, big wind events. These are all things that like maybe we don't always get a lot of snow at once up here. But like, man, is it windy in Montana. So like we often have many red flags on days when we go out. And like the reason we identify these like signs of, either weather or within the snowpack, these signs of instability is so we can default to making more conservative decisions. So it's like if you are wanting to go out and ride in a certain zone and it's really, really windy, like this picture, like maybe you want to avoid the spots that are being wind loaded in steep terrain, or use something like seeing a recent avalanche as a reason to be wary about being underneath a slide path. You're seeing a natural avalanche or a rider triggered avalanche. Yeah, and then the last one, rapid warming. So this is typically in the springtime, but with the way our weather's been, it could be more of a mid-season problem too. Anytime that there's just rapid above freezing temperature change, you should be heads up. And also the riding conditions can deteriorate really quickly too. But being aware of like when you're seeing pinwheels or you're seeing snow moving, like that's just kind of a big red flag for in unstable snow. And that's to kind of sum it up. Like Zach's going to talk a lot more about this, but like why we teach you about the snowpack and what causes avalanches is to hopefully be able to make informed decisions. And some ways to do that would be referencing an avalanche forecast for what to expect out there, being able to differentiate between different types of avalanche problems so you can know what to expect. Because, and you can probably talk about this a lot during your field day too, but like you would expect a wind slab problem or wind loaded slopes to maybe behave differently than like these persistent weak layer problems. And you could better avoid, a wind slab problem if you can tell where it's been wind loaded versus a persistent slab problem that's all across the mountain. Like it may be harder to avoid that. And your best chance of avoidance may be just not being in steep terrain. So that's like why you got to know the difference. And then, yeah, just using those red flags to look for obvious signs of instability as reasons to not be exposed to avalanche terrain. So yeah, that's kind of the wrap up I have. If you haven't signed up for the GNFAC Avalanche Advisory, you can do that either by zapping this QR code or just going on our website and you can sign up there. So mtavalanche.com. I'm sure you'll see it another time too. That may be how many of you found this course. All right. Any questions? Man, it felt like I just talked for a really long time. Sorry if I went over, Zach. Sweet.
Good.
Yeah, you can take over your screen sharing here.
Okay.
Hey, just really quick.
Mm-hmm.
What I just zapped the QR code, is that, do you just email that out daily or how does that work?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so that's just the email sign up. So you can put in your email and you'll get the forecast every morning.
Every morning. Excellent. Thank you.
Right on. Well, excuse me. I am going to discuss the avalanche and decision-making process when we're out there traveling on snowmobiles. Basically, the human factor component to that avalanche triangle that Shannon was showing in her previous slides. So here's that triangle again. And us being humans, we kind of interact with all of these elements and factors that pertain to avalanches. and the backcountry. So we're that fourth variable, and we basically create the risk interaction between avalanches and us. So we really need to kind of manage ourselves and our people that we travel with accordingly. Another kind of recent thought process on this triangle is, of course, another triangle where you kind of interact with that weather, snowpack, and terrain triangle, but with yourself as well as with your group. And this kind of takes a deeper dive into the perspective that you're seeing and your expectations and goals, as well as the people you travel with, and being really familiar with all that interaction. So it's a really cool article that was in some recent Avalanche review, if you want to dive deeper into that. But let's kind of discuss what it means as far as human factors. We kind of have a list of the popular ones being attitude, ego, incorrect assumptions, denial, tunnel vision, complacency, money or time investment, group dynamics, social media, and peer pressure. There's certainly a plethora of more human factors that can alter a day out in the backcountry or your group's decision making process. So just familiarizing yourself with these components and kind of maybe even summing yourself up into some of these. Maybe it's in certain riding areas that you find maybe you're complacent to certain slopes because you haven't seen it slid. The peer pressure one can obviously be pretty driven in the snowmobile community out on these fast, powerful machines. So just knowing your ability and catering your trip accordingly. We also love the word facet, so we can also have an acronym for these heuristics or these human factors. Basically, F for familiarity, A for acceptance, C for commitment, E is expert halo, T is tracks. This is a big one. It's hard to miss going up a slope if there's a lot of tracks on it already, but you can't take that for certain. And then that social proof or facilitation. So just kind of trying to, again, just familiarizing yourself with these egos and mindsets, and just trying to dial it back prior to your trip, and really hone in on what you're trying to get out of your goals for the day. This is a big popular slope in Cook City. It's Henderson Mountain, typical popular area for some hill climbing. Obviously, hopefully, all of you on this conversation are savvy and situationally aware enough to notice these individuals are probably not sitting in a prime location for just watching their friend high mark that slope. This is that same slope on a different day. We can see where that bench was. The individuals were hanging out on was clearly in the avalanche path. So just back to that complacency factor, or maybe social presence of just wanting to hang out and be basking in the sun. But we really need to go back to that identifying avalanche terrain and recognizing avalanche terrain and being aware of where we place ourselves in that component. Most avalanche accidents really occur because we underestimate that avalanche hazard, or we overestimate our ability to manage the avalanche hazard, whether it's riding ability or assuming that maybe stable test results mean that we can branch out into more promiscuous terrain. We really need to be thorough about our data collection and observations before stepping out. Problems with decision making can lead to avalanche accidents, as well as good decisions can also lead to help us avoid avalanches, as well as sometimes they just tailor good luck. And so we have to really really know when we just got lucky or when we actually made those good decisions. This is a large avalanche off of Bridger Bowl, side country or back country, off Saddle Peak. Very popular destination for kind of easy turns, as we can see. That does not necessarily mean this slope is safe to ski. So really just doing thorough investigations of your own before jumping on a slope that has tracks. So we can kind of talk about how we can make good decisions as a group while traveling on snowmobiles in the backcountry. Navigating through avalanche terrain safely is probably top priority. We need to make sure that we have an objective assessment as well as a know about the avalanche danger for that area and the day, and adjust your travel plan and the train you choose to travel through accordingly, both based on your ability and your group as a whole. You can't just drag somebody along for a powder day because you really want to go get some technical terrain. Kind of tailor the destination to the group. And then establishing the risk prior to going into the field is really important. We don't want to make any generalized assumptions or quick change of plans in the field. This often can lead to mistakes and sometimes incidences. That being said, we have a really great tool, the Avalanche Forecast and the Avalanche Center local to whichever area you're riding at. They all will basically digest their synopsis to these North American public danger scale. And so with even if you're having a hard time reading through the full diagrams and paragraphs of what they're seeing in certain areas, you can really just get the travel advice and what to expect in terms of avalanches based on what the avalanche danger level is. So just this is a really quick, easy way to kind of give yourself some travel advice or even see what the likelihood of a particular avalanche problem might be. Most avalanche, in fact, all avalanche forecast centers, their website will have a link to this little diagram. So if you ever need to go back to it, it's a very easy item to find, and it should be something you're familiar with. But even like Shannon was saying, we have low danger down here. Does not ever mean no danger. It just means we have generally safe avalanche conditions. And like she mentioned, we are just lacking an overlying slab on that weak layer in a lot of our forecast regions. In terms of decision making for snowmobiling in the backcountry and avalanche terrain, we really need to kind of think about these aspects. And this is kind of pulled from an ARI framework, which it really is a good advocate for motorized education and kind of promoting more mechanized travel practices into avalanche safety. And they really, go into fitting the goals of your team for the day, and knowing your group's machines as a great thing to have in mind when traveling on a snowmobile in the backcountry. They are prone to failure, and that shouldn't come to surprise to anybody. And obviously, like preparing, like we discussed a lot, reading that forecast is your number one tool and should be a very familiar resource for anybody that's trying to recreate in the backcountry, as well as preparing your gear and being adequate with your rest. You shouldn't be rolling in at 1 a.m. after New Year's Day and trying to get up at 5 for a big day on the slopes. It's just not fair to your group as a whole. And with gear, we'll go into that as well in the avalanche rescue portion of the slides, but just making sure your gear is prepared properly, your airbags packed and charged, your shovels and beacons are all new and in working order. All this is super important, and as well as knowing the group that you travel with has all this too. it's your gear is only going to do your partners good, as well as their gear is going to benefit you. So make sure that's on the forefront of your mind. And then planning, this is a huge one with what Shannon was saying, all the cool savvy tools. We have maps and all sorts of cool things at our disposal, and it really makes trip planning quite easy. And we can give ourselves options A through C in most areas that we ride, and it really allows us to have a more dialed execution of our day, and not just be fiddling around with trying to make on the fly decisions, which often lead to mistakes. And then riding safe is mega important for snowmobiling. These things can hurt you. They often will hurt you, and so just giving yourself as many cards stacked in your favor will be the best benefit. So having, communications, radios, obviously keeping visual of your riding partners. This is a big one. A lot of avalanche incidents unfortunately occur due to the parties just losing visual of one another for a little too long, and as well as just that ability, riding within your ability as well as the group's ability, and not pushing anybody to pass their brink. This one at the end is quite often probably overlooked and not really brought to the table in a lot of riding groups, but it really should be. And just bringing it all home, it doesn't have to be super formal and thorough, but just a quick like powwow at the end of the day to bring it all home and like understand, did we make the right decisions, or did we actually get lucky? Did we kind of roll the dice a little too much, or go off the plan that we originally discussed, and find those mistakes. That way you don't repeat them, as well as it's fun to relive and chat about the day from different perspectives. I think we've got somebody in the waiting room. Oh, Shannon's got it. Cool.
Let him in.
And then basically, after all the facts are gathered, we really need to continue to update that plan, whether it's the making of the plan at the beginning of the day or the day before, but just continually adapting to what you had expected to see and what you're actually seeing, because that could be two completely different things, especially if you're riding in any areas that don't have forecasts, which there's a lot of mechanized areas within Bozeman that are great for snowmobiling, but they are not on the forecast advisory. So using that forecast advisory and then gathering all that you can by yourself is going to be the best to your benefit, and staying out of harm's way. Trees are often a really fun riding zone, but it is sometimes folklore that people say they are safe from avalanches, or that you can't trigger them in trees, which obviously, as we can see in this photo, is completely false. And the rule of thumb is, if the trees are as so dense to where you can't ride through them, then yes, they might have an anchoring effect, but that to that point we're unable to ride through them. So just really, back to that train piece, like Shannon was mentioning, this we really have all the control in the world to pick and choose the train that we want to travel through. So as long as we can identify whether we're in avalanche terrain, that's going to be our biggest tool while traveling through backcountry. Back to that lucky or good. Obviously, if you can't be good, be lucky, and recognize when you're lucky in order to be better. And then just back to that practicing debriefing, really can kind of bring people's perspectives to the table that you might not have seen a mistake that was made by the group, and somebody else might have. So that also goes to just making sure your voice feels felt in the group that you're traveling with. You should never feel like you're undermined or just not taking into consideration in your group's decision making. So make sure that's an important factor to keep into your traveling companions. And then obviously let's hope for some of this soon. It'll make for certainly some avalanches around here, but then eventually maybe some better snow conditions. So it's inevitable we'll get both. But any questions? Cool. Well, I've got one more slide on the deck that we'll roll right into. This is just going to be a quick little recap on avalanche rescue. So we should all be hopefully seeing that slide up right now, and looks like we're good to go. So avalanche rescue, this is going to be, you know, the number one basically tool to our basically survival if we ever get caught in an avalanche, or our partner's survival if they ever get caught in an avalanche. And it's largely underthought when snowmobilers go hanging out in the backcountry, and often this is a complete course in itself. So this is just going to be a really quick overview of it all, and we'll get a bit more practice of hands-on in the field with this. And I implore you to definitely take it upon yourself and your group and your friends to practice beyond what we give you. It is a tool that will perish, so you have to be familiar and keep up with it. So let's just recap the rescue. We've basically got the three major components we all want to always carry on our persons at all times. So not just in the tunnel bag, in your backpack. The beacon needs to be in a beacon specific pocket, needs to be on the persons at all times. The shovel and probe as well should be on the person. It's great to have an extra set on your tunnel. Sure, why not? We're not carrying the weight. But you need those three rescue pieces on you at all time. Practicing with this gear, like I said, it's all perishable. So if you don't use it, you will lose it. The beacons, they mainly, all manufacturers will work fairly similarly, but knowing your own manufacturer in depth is really good. Read the manual, look at the YouTube videos. They've got basically everything you need to know, from single burial to multi-burial tricks and functions of your specific beacon. It's also important to kind of familiarize yourself with your group's beacons. That can also help in certain situations. So traveling one at a time, that kind of will eliminate the number of casualties or individuals stuck in an avalanche. So if we can reduce the exposure to that avalanche terrain, we'll reduce the potential of how many people get caught. So this image is a little small and hard to see, but we have a skier up on this face, and the three other individuals are just directly fault line below. Kind of back to that just situational placement, you know, where watch your partners from a safe location. Don't sit in the run out path. For rescue, if someone in your party is caught, we want to stay calm, take a quick breath, you know, just bring the calm to the situation, and have your plan and begin your rescue. So often it's really great to have somebody step up and take the lead role. If you find that you're seeing that needs to happen, that is then your job, and congratulations, just take it upon yourself. But it often works a lot smoother if there is kind of a point person taking charge. Of course, if you are a single searcher, then you are just running the show, so you don't need to orchestrate things. You just have to basically go through the motions. If you are caught, make sure you're staying calm. Try to get off the slide path. If your machine's still on, obviously throttle out of it. There's surprisingly a lot of close calls that people are able to just throttle away from the slab. certainly it does mean you made a bad decision, and you should account for that and kind of be humbled. But if you get knocked off your machine, again, trying to get to the flanks by swimming, kind of making yourself as large as you can. With motorized users, we often have the airbag system. So obviously, if you are noticing an avalanche occurs, pull that airbag, definitely deploy it. That being said, for safe travel practices, that airbag tag should be out and ready to deploy before you're in avalanche terrain. If you ever are planning to travel through it or near avalanche terrain, don't wait till you're in the terrain to put that on. It's kind of like a trailhead check that should be out at the beacon check, in my opinion. If your partner is caught, so we're the searchers, we're going to kind of just go through a quick search overview. We want to just always check scene safety. There always could be some potential hang fire, as they call it, or a sympathetic avalanche. So just some pieces of the slab that haven't released yet and still could. This is in terms of top-down situation, which it isn't, quite frankly, how motorized users approach safety all the time. So we'll just buzz through this quick, and then I'll tell you the nuances about a mechanized approach for this. But for the most part, the motions are pretty similar. So obviously, going to the top of the debris or point last seen, that point last seen is going to be the biggest kind of key tell all. If you have an individual scene halfway down the slope, it's a quick and easy fix to eliminate a portion of that debris pile. If we've seen them past a certain point, they can only get buried at or downhill from where they were last seen. So that makes that easy. Signal search is basically that point where we're looking for that initial signal. We're traveling in a zigzag manner, or maybe slicing up the debris pile if we have multiple searchers, but we're just trying to get that signal, essentially. Once we get that signal, we're getting that core search and we're getting closer to the victim. You can kind of see the arched approach that transceiver will take into the victim. Once we get within under or at 3 meters, that's basically where your fine search should begin. And this is kind of where we're getting down on the ground and starting to basically do our grid search. Once we have that pinpointed location, that's when the probe comes out. Or if you're with multiple people, they would already have the probe ready for you. So you're not, skipping a beat. You probe where you got that pinpoint. Ideally, you get a strike and you immediately dig downhill from that probe strike. In terms of proper probing, there's a few ways. This is just the concentric circle method. As we can see, the probe is perpendicular from the slope, and we go at that lowest fine search spot. If we, for some reason, don't get a strike there initially, we don't want to go back to the beacon. We want to just start probing in a kind of a concentric outer, working outward circle with that spacing of 10 centimeters apart. And this is going to, ideally you should hopefully hit it in that first strike, but we want to be really methodical about these probe strikes. We don't want to be like moving the probe in any way to where we're missing some portions of that snowpack underneath 3 or 2 feet of snow or more potentially. So begin at the lowest, probe in the concentric circle. People also go in boxes, ever expanding boxes. It's really just keeping that 10 centimeter spacing and making sure you just you're consistent about what method you choose. And your probe should be definitely perpendicular every time. That's going to eliminate any voids that you might be popping. And then once you have that confirmed strike, absolutely leave the probe in the ground. This is going to help identify where that victim is in the snow. This is a quick little video about digging from downhill and how you can kind of see it's a benefit to just basically make a big platform so you can pull that victim out and have an adequate space to perform some more first aid, because they most certainly, you don't know their condition, so they might need some more help. Here are some more kind of like little shoveling tips. If you have more than just a single person, you can kind of set up in a V formation and conveyor belt the snow. And oh, I think we got a chat.
No, it was just me. I
Oh
was
yeah,
just
yeah.
doing some
Some
conversion.
math conversion. Yeah. Yeah, like Shannon said, we're kind of trying to eliminate the smallest portion of your body. So a foot generally, or a calf, because we definitely don't know the orientation of the victim underneath the snow. But for shoveling, we just really want to shovel strong, fast, and making sure your shovel is metal, not broken. They definitely need to take some abuse. Avalanche debris can set up really quick and kind of can be considered to be like concrete. So digging fast and efficient is going to be your best bet. So kind of chopping big blocks and then moving those big blocks is gonna be the least amount of work, as well as your form. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. But you want to chop in the downward motion. You shouldn't be picking up the snow over your shoulder every time. If you have a group that's doing a shoveling, you need to communicate. Often the person in the front has got a lot of adrenaline going on, so they're not really thinking about them being tired or slowing down or needing a break. But the folks in the back, they'll really have a better eye and perspective of, hey, I can see they're not really digging like they were 2 minutes ago. At that point, maybe just speak up and switch groups or switch roles, and that's kind of what that motion of the arrows is going on there. Another big one is keeping your gloves on, making sure you're able to go through the beacon search with your gloves on is very important as well. Certainly, if you have like heated gloves, making sure you have liners or something, you can just pop those off, because those will interfere with the transceivers and the search. So making sure you're aware of your gear. And just stepping up, kind of back to that, if you see something weird or something that needs to be said, just make it known to the group and be assertive. And that is kind of a quick little recap of Avalanche Rescue. That was pretty choppy. Did it come through as choppy for you too, Shannon?
Yes.
That's unfortunate.
Zach, do you want to talk about really quickly just like what might be different on a
Oh yeah.
bottom up rescue? Because that I feel like that's going to be the most likely scenario, or not doing
Mhm.
directly top down.
Yeah. So in this situation where we're at the bottom, the rescuer or the group of rescuers is at the bottom of the slope that slid on the victim. We basically can default back to this last scene point. Obvious kind of where were they and where could they go. In terms of our tools we have at our disposal, is we have the snow machines. So we could take a snowmobile and certainly buzz it to the side of one of these avalanche flanks and get to that last scene point really fast. That being said, we need to make sure, obviously, the scene is safe. Sometimes a very confined avalanche path, you won't be able to ride a snowmobile up the avalanche debris. So just parking it at the bottom or some closest proximity and starting from there, you'll often maybe have to start that zigzag pattern from the toe or the bottom of the avalanche path. And that being said, the a lot of these newer machines have large interference to beacons and transceivers. So you need to be really aware of, like, if you're zipping, or if your friend's zipping around on a machine trying to find surface clues and you're using your transceiver, you need to know, like, where are they in proximity to you, and is that affecting your signal search? So just making sure that if you use your machine, that you're turning it completely off, turn the key completely off even, before you start that search process, because that can pose a large interference and kind of throw things a wonky. But certainly using your machines to your advantage, getting to that last scene point, that's going to be a big kind of advantage that we have over skiers, and that often does lead to a lot of close calls, where mechanized users are dug up really quick because their friends weren't right at the bottom of where the avalanche stops, and it's kind of it's interesting, but it just goes to show that the rescue process being performed in a quick and proficient manner can result in a promising outcome. So just that, I think, would be the biggest change of the bottom up situation, is being able to use your machine to get up a little bit of that slope. Do you have
You
anything
know,
to add on that,
Yeah, I
Shannon?
was going to add just useful framing of like use whatever tool is at your disposal to accomplish the task at hand. Like beacons are really good at finding beacons. And if you're paying attention and say your buddy's airbag is just barely poking out of the debris, like you don't need a beacon to go find them if the airbag's attached to their body. So like use your common sense, use all of the tools at your disposal to like make it happen. Because like the big picture with this is our chance of survival in avalanche goes like way down at like 15 minutes. So we really don't have very much time to make it happen.
Mhm.
So just yeah, using whatever tools you can to accomplish getting this person an airway as quickly as possible, because that's really what's killing them, unless they had a really big traumatic injury. Like it's their lack of air that's killing them. So just using what you can to get it done.
Yep.
Not an ideal situation to be in. Like that's why we, sound like broken records saying you should avoid avalanche terrain, because these are really serious, can be really serious events, and we hope that people can have a good day out without having to be performing an avalanche rescue.
Mhm.
that was something. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
That was something. Um, I took this course last year and just it blew my mind. I'm doing it again just because how awesome it was, and good. You know, thank you guys for doing this, because it was just eye-opening last year. But that was something with the whole, rescuing, that we really didn't talk about much in the field, but just you can get to um, the side of the avalanche. It's easier to walk down than try to go up.
Mhm.
And pretty much all of the group started at the bottom and started walking up, and we did our group rescue. And that whole leadership aspect of somebody just taking charge and saying, hey, two of you split, one goes left, one goes right, get up the side, cut through the middle, do something. We kind of talked about it afterwards. And it was just, that element of going up and really practicing as if something actually had gone wrong, was huge. And that using your machine for me was just like, duh, why wouldn't you? But then
Mhm.
also experiencing it, your sled does mess with